The Camino and God. It's not something you see a lot on YouTube, is it? But I think it's something we need to talk about. Don't panic. I'm not here trying to convert you or anything like that. I just want to share some thoughts and perspectives on it. Coming right up. Okay, so the Camino and God. Now, don't worry, it's not going to be a heavy video this week. But somebody mentioned in the comments a couple of weeks ago, and sorry, I should have looked your name up, that I had missed an important element on the channel, and that is that the Camino is a Christian pilgrimage. So I thought we should probably talk about that a little bit. And, you know, let me put all the caveats up in front, you know. I'm certainly not going to be preaching to you. I'm not going to be saying you have to walk the Camino in a particular way. I'm not going to be pushing a particular religion. I'm not even that religious myself. But I'm going to share some thoughts about the sort of religious and spiritual side of the Camino, which I think is worth knowing if you haven't walked a Camino, because it may influence how you undertake your Camino, if that makes sense. So there's kind of three things that I want to talk about. One, I'll state my position very clearly on all of this. I'll go through some elements about why I think it's worth talking about. And number three, how you might utilize some of this information when you walk your own Camino, and it might give you pause for thought about how you're going to walk your own Camino. So there we go. It's not going to be that structured. I warn you, I'm probably going to ramble a little bit, but I think it's an important topic. And you'll understand why as we get going. And I'd love to get your comments down below, of course. So enough of the ramble. Let me just sort of state my position on this, and I think I've made it pretty clear in previous videos. I wouldn't call myself religious, to be honest. I'm not a Catholic. The Camino de Santiago is a Catholic pilgrimage route. I'm definitely spiritual. And probably that was one of the things that drew me to walk the Camino de Santiago for the first time in 2015. It was watching that movie, The Way. And what appealed to me, I think, was that sort of spiritual element of it. And of course, Martin Sheen, the star of that movie, is a devout Catholic, and you know, the sort of religious and spiritual elements of the Camino, I think, came through fairly well in that movie. So I was intrigued by all of that. Without sort of going on too much, kind of, you know, where do I sit in all of this? I don't follow any formal religion. I would call myself a Christian. I believe in God. I've never read this. I don't fully understand formal religion, to be honest. It kind of goes over my head a bit. But I do honestly believe there is a spirit, if you like. We call him, her, God, looking after us. And I do believe, you know, the stories of Jesus and so on that we're taught at school. But yeah, the sort of the details of it all, I don't really understand. To me, it's more sort of in the heart rather than in all the sort of detail and the rituals and so on associated with religions. So that's kind of where I'm at. And my first Camino was undertaken very much with a sense of searching for something. And although I never really sort of articulated it even to myself, I think I was kind of searching for a bit of faith and you know, what's out there. Certainly looking for answers. As I've mentioned on other videos, you know, I was really sort of burnt out at work and wanting time out to really reflect on where I was at and what my priorities were and things like that. So that's me. Not religious, not a Catholic, don't go to mass, anything like that. But, you know, fairly spiritual. And I kind of am drawn to many different types of religions, to be honest. I should say that Pat, my wife, is Buddhist, so I go to lots of Buddhist temples, and I love the aura in some of these buildings and the energy, you know. So whether it be a Buddhist temple, a Catholic church, you know, whatever, I kind of get that energy, and I'm drawn to those places. Not sure why. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I suppose I undertook that first Camino hoping I would kind of learn more about my spiritual side. The other reason I want to talk about this, I'll share some of those experiences and kind of what they meant to me and did they change me. The other reason I want to talk about this is that we are talking about a Christian pilgrimage route, has been for 1,000 years or so. Prior to that, it was a Roman trade route. We're talking about the main Camino routes here. Prior to that, even pre-Christian time, I understand it was a pagan pilgrimage route that follows the Milky Way. The Camino Francis follows the Milky Way across Spain. And with all of that background and history, I think we owe it to ourselves to understand the spiritual and the religious nature of the Camino, if only to acknowledge and honour the route, the pilgrims who have walked before us, and so on. And I've said this a few times. It's not a hike, not for me anyway. It has a much deeper meaning than that, and I'll get into some of those sort of areas. But I think even if you're walking without any ounce of sort of religion or spirituality, I'd ask you to just acknowledge that you are walking a Christian pilgrimage route that millions upon millions of pilgrims have walked over the years, and to acknowledge, honour and respect that. And many of the pilgrims around you will be walking for religious purposes, not that you would necessarily notice. So let's kind of acknowledge all of that. And of course, when you finish your Camino, if you're finishing in Santiago de Compostela and you go to the Pilgrim's office and you want to get your Compostela, your certificate to show that you have walked, they will ask you, have you walked? I think the questions have changed recently. They used to ask, did you walk for religious reasons, religious or spiritual reasons, or just for kind of a holiday? Now they've added one which I think is phrased something like, have you walked for religious reasons or for the purpose of searching for something, seeking, which was very much what my first Camino was about. And so they're sort of trying to get a sense, for their statistics, what proportion of people are walking for religious purposes. It also means, without digressing too much, if you just say, no, I just came along for the walk, you'll get one type of certificate. If you say that I've been walking for religious, spiritual reasons, searching for something, whatever, then you'll get a different certificate, which is actually a nicer looking one. So that's another reason to understand the sort of religious background to the Camino. Let me talk a little bit then about the impact, the personal impact that it's had on me. And look, your journey may be different. You may be undertaking this Camino as a devout Catholic and you know exactly why you're walking and what to expect. You may be an atheist, an agnostic. You may be, Buddhist, like my wife, Muslim, whatever. People of all religions walk the Camino these days. And I think that's great. Now, the devout Catholics might not like me saying this, but to me, the Camino, the enormous draw and rewards that the Camino can offer are in terms of that spirituality and renewing or establishing faith. And to me, it almost doesn't matter what faith. I call myself Christian. I'm not a Catholic. I believe in God, but other people might believe in a different God. You might find that God out on the Camino. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's about immersing yourself in, or providing yourself that opportunity to seek that more spiritual and religious side of you. So let's put that aside for a minute. How did it impact me? So someone who doesn't go to church regularly, doesn't really understand formal religion, all of the rigmarole when you go to church. I've sat at the back of church during Mass and I kind of really don't understand what's going on. So how can I say that I've enhanced faith walking the Camino? Now I'm talking about the Camino Francis. and it's a little bit different to the other routes because of the infrastructure and the number of pilgrims walking the Camino Frances. You are exposed a lot more to the religious elements of walking a Camino, far more than, say, for example, my understanding is on the Via de la Plata, which I'm walking next. So why is that relevant? Well, you imagine, you know, in my case, I walk very slowly. I'm walking 7 or 8 hours a day for a month. Every village I'm going through, it's got these ancient churches which I'm drawn to go in. I don't attend the services, but I will go in and sit in those churches, almost every one that I pass, and reflect and think. And what did I find myself doing on the first day? Praying. I probably haven't prayed since I was at school. But a funny thing kind of happens. Certainly did to me on Camino, that you are exposed, if that's the right term, to this pilgrimage history, and you know, all the trappings of religion are around you, and it's very hard not to let some of that in. Not that you wouldn't want to stop it. I'm just saying some of that will get into you. And I found within the first few days, it was starting to become a deeply spiritual journey for me. I won't call it religious because that implies, you know, a formal religion. I'd rather use the term spiritual. And so how did that manifest itself? Well, funnily enough, the day before I was about to depart, a very good friend of mine dropped me in a rosary. I can't remember whether I mentioned it to David that I would like to walk with one, but I kind of felt I should. You know, I was undertaking this Christian pilgrimage, and I wanted to have something with me that would remind me about that. And so this is a lovely antique one I bought when I got back that I now wear when I'm walking a Camino, and it kind of reminds me why I'm walking. And I don't pray the rosary, I'm not a Catholic, but very often, you know, in the churches I come to, I'll hold the crucifix as I'm praying for whatever that day. Very often I'll stop on a mountaintop and just be amazed at the scenery and offer a prayer of thanks. And this kind of gives me a little bit of a focal point, I guess. So, you know, I like to wear that when I'm walking the Camino. Do I wear it at home? No. Gee, I'm probably sounding like a bit of a hypocrite here. How come I'm suddenly so spiritual on the Camino, but at home I'm not? Don't know. Answers down below. So that impact really started to sort of hit me almost right from the start. So, you know, how did it manifest itself? I was going into churches, I was praying. I've mentioned on videos before that very first Camino, I didn't expect to kind of get through the first week because I was injured, and I kind of got into this routine of every morning and every evening offering a prayer of thanks for being able to get through the day, you know, and it was basically, you know, dear Lord, thank you for allowing me to walk on the Camino another day, you know, for the lessons that you've put before me, and I'll be walking with an open heart and an open mind, and whatever else you got to teach me, you know, I'll listen. That was basically, you know, my prayer every day. The reason I mention that is that I would suggest, I'm not going to suggest how you walk your Camino. You might want to think about the manner in which you're walking a Camino, because to me that little prayer kind of says it all, that I'm not going to have any expectations, and I'm going to be open to whatever happens, and kind of just let it in. Just let that sink in for a minute. Because what you'll find on a Camino is that lots of stuff is going to not go the way you want. I'm not going to say it's going to go wrong. Stuff happens, and it throws you off balance. And I learned very quickly on my first Camino that these were generally lessons. There was opportunities in these little glitches as I went along. And when I adopted that attitude, something would happen, You know, it might be something simple like I couldn't book into a place that I wanted to stay in. And rather than being upset about it, I go, okay, maybe I'm being guided to stay somewhere else. And I would end up staying somewhere else, and I'd meet this amazing person over dinner, you know, and it was almost like I'd been guided to not stay there, but stay there. And these little things happened all the time during that first Camino. The first one was a little bit different because I walked alone. The next two I was walking with someone, and I think that kind of distracted me a little bit from noticing these little things that were going on. So that's why I prefer to walk alone. So those sorts of things, you know, happen if you're open to it. So I would implore you, particularly if you're walking your first Camino, to just bear that in mind. Walk with an open heart, walk with an open mind, and be accepting of whatever happens. Because sometimes I think you're being guided in a particular way for a reason, maybe to meet someone, to learn something. I kind of felt that almost every day walking on my first Camino. I was somewhat hesitant to do this video because, you know, if you're kind of not into spirituality and things like that, I'm going to sound like a total fruitcake, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think it's important. There were times, most of the time through my first Camino, that I walked alone, that I never felt lonely. And why was that? Because I felt someone was guiding the journey. And you're going to think, oh, here he goes. It was just a sense, you know, I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt that I wasn't sort of totally alone. And if you haven't seen the video where I relate 3 stories, things that happened to me, which absolutely were clear in my mind that I was not walking alone, I'll put the link up here. Go and watch those 3 stories. I have told those stories to a few people and they kind of go, wow. In fact, I'll just digress for a minute. I can remember I was sitting in Castro Jerez in a lovely hostel having dinner with a couple, and a guy who was walking alone was sitting opposite me, and I related one of these stories to him. And he looked at me and went, "That's what I want." I said, "What do you mean, Jeff?" Or whatever, you know, his name was. "I want these things to happen, you know, I want things to be revealed to me." And I said, "Mate, just, you know, chill. Don't have any expectations, and maybe things will." You know, they're pretty amazing stories, so do have a look at that video. So, I did warn you I was going to ramble a bit. So yeah, how did the Camino impact me while I was walking? Yeah, I wanted to feel closer to God, you know, absolutely. So going into churches, praying, all the rest of it. You know what I discovered? For me at least, God wasn't in the churches. God was out in the landscapes, amongst the fields and the mountains and the trees and things like that. So maybe that's my kind of misunderstanding of formal religion or something, but where I really, you know, felt the presence of God, if you like, was out in nature. So that was interesting. I'm going to digress here for a minute and tell you another story, which might help you, particularly if you're a little bit cynical about this and you're sort of thinking, oh, you know, Rob's a fruitcake. I've liked his videos up to now, but no, he's lost the plot. You know, he's a nutter. I'm going to relate a story to you, which is totally unrelated to the Camino, but it may help you understand what I'm going to suggest to you. And that is, even if you are not religious, not spiritual or whatever, fake it and see what happens. So let me tell you this little story. I went on this 7-day retreat, which had nothing to do with the religion. It was actually about singing and songwriting. And unbeknown to me, it was also about meditation and chanting and all sorts of kind of weird stuff that I'd never come across. And I think we were sort of into day 3 of all of this. And I was feeling very uncomfortable about it all. You know, it was all holding hands and chanting and toning, and I'd never been exposed to this sort of thing before. And I was talking to a lady who was also part of the group, small group of 12 or so. My apologies, I can't remember her name, but let's say Susan. And I say, Susan, are you getting any of this? And she goes, no, I think it's complete BS, to be honest. And I was struggling with it, and she was struggling with it. And we made a pact. And I said, Susan, how about, we've paid a lot of money to be here at this retreat. How about we kind of forget that we think it's all BS, and we pretend it's real, because all these other people are really into this, and they seem to be getting an enormous amount out of it. Let's just pretend it's real, and maybe we'll kind of feel better about doing all these different exercises that we were doing, the chanting and the toning and all the rest of it. So that's what we did. And then I think by the end of the second day, second or third day, I caught up with Susan. I said, what do you reckon? She said, the penny's dropped. It's clicked. I get this now. And I was the same. And we were doing, all of the toning and the chanting and all the rest of it, and really getting it, and all of the energy work. And I thought, wow, all these other people got it. We thought it was complete BS, but I guess what it was, we let ourselves go and kind of just accepted, let's see what happens. We're not going to fight it, we'll go with it. And it really started to happen for us. So I suppose what I'm saying is, if you are not interested in the religious or spiritual aspect of the Camino, look, I totally get that. I wouldn't want you to miss out though. So if none of that is of interest to you, I'd suggest fake it a bit, particularly if you're walking the Camino Frances. So what might you do? You might, for example, visit the churches that you pass along the way, go and light candles, sit and reflect and wonder at the environment. You might pause at the wayside crosses that you'll see along the way and think, have a look at the inscriptions and what's the purpose of this cross. Very often they're pilgrims who've died along the way, and reflect on that pilgrim and think about them and their journey. You might, for example, this happened to me walking out of Burgos, walking to Orneos, and you're walking over the sort of beginnings of the Meseta there on an old Roman road. And for a moment I just imagined 2,000 years ago, the Romans walking along there. And I tell you what, I could feel the energy of those people, thousands of years ago. Just let yourself go with those sort of feelings. And you could almost feel the spirit of those people over thousands of years, millions of people who had walked along that route. You sense something, and stuff like that just happens every day that I'm walking a Camino. And I assure you, I am not nuts. And as I keep saying, I'm not overly religious. I just leave myself open to letting things in. That's all I'm saying. And perhaps, if you're a little bit cynical or, wondering about these things, do the same. Go with an open mind, go with an open heart, see what happens. I was going to say, if you're a devout Catholic walking it, you kind of get this. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a Catholic, but, it could almost happen that for you, the religious element of the Camino is going to Mass and all the rest of it, Maybe leave yourself open to a little bit more than that, see what happens along the way and on the mountaintops and all the rest of it, I'm not here to tell you what religion should feel like, because I don't really know much about it. But I think that whole element of just being open to things is so important. So that's on the spiritual religious side. Of course, you should also do the same with the environment you're coming across, the people that you're meeting, and you will have an incredible journey. So look, I've probably rambled on quite a bit here, and if it's absolute garbage, I apologise, but I thought it worth sharing some of this because it doesn't get talked about much. I'm a member of a great forum where I understand why. One of the rules of the forum is that there's no discussion about religion. And you know, my first reaction was, you're kidding, aren't you? This forum is about a Christian pilgrimage and people are not allowed to talk about religion. I totally understand why that rule is in place, because I've been on that forum for quite a few years. Because people argue about, you know, you should walk this way, you should walk, you know, you should carry a rosary this way, and people miss the point and they get all wound up in the mechanics of the religion and how things should be done. Maybe that's why I'm not sort of overtly religious. I call myself spiritual. So to me, it's got nothing, you know, my journey has got nothing to do with formal religion. I will go and sit on a mountaintop and I will talk to God. And you know, in my mind, he listens, because I see signs that he's listened. You know, that's how I walk my Camino. All right, so let me just look through my notes and see if I've forgotten anything. So just coming back to the beginning, you know, why are we even talking about this? I think one of the important things is that we do acknowledge and honour and recognise that whatever Camino route we're walking on a Christian pilgrimage route, and you know, we should respect that, whatever our views on Christianity or religion or whatever. So I think that's important. You know, whatever your journey, the purpose of your journey is about, whatever you expect to get from the journey, I honestly hope you get that. And if you've never really sort of thought much about religion or spirituality, leave yourself open to it a bit. Maybe even fake it a bit, you know, in the early days. Let some of it in and see what happens. I'll tell you a funny story. I do digress too much, I'm sorry. So Pat, my wife, is a Buddhist. If you were walking the Camino with her, you would think she's a devout Catholic. I mean, she is a classic example of what can happen, I think, on the Camino. The environment just kind of works on you in that way, in a very positive way. Pat will go into the churches and light candles and say prayers. You know, she'll spend ages in there. She'll light candles for all the family members and things like that. Like me, she'll go in and pray in every church. Like me, she hugs trees. Why does she hug trees? Because she feels the energy of God in the landscape. You know? Yes, we have both lost the plot. We have both gone completely nuts. If you've walked a Camino and you've had experiences like that, please do comment down below and tell people I'm not a complete lunatic. But if you think I'm a complete lunatic, by all means comment down below anyway. I think it's good to talk about this stuff because not many people do. And you know, maybe it's going to sow some seeds in your mind. It might get you to ask a few questions, might get you thinking about how you're going to walk your Camino. That's all I wanted to raise it for. So there we go. I've rabbited on enough. So what's the last thing on my notes? Basically, just walk the Camino your way. Leave yourself open to whatever happens. And who knows, you may have not just a great journey, but a very spiritual journey as well. So there we go. I have been waffling on long enough. The last thing I would say is if you're going on your first Camino, have a wonderful time. Whatever reason you're walking the Camino for, whether it be religious, spiritual, holiday, you know, cycling holiday, whatever. Just remember, walk with an open heart, walk with an open mind, and let stuff in, let stuff happen. And may you have a glorious Camino. Thanks for watching. Can't wait to see the comments on this one. I'll see you next week. Bye for now.